Today, three stories about counting, and about who gets left out of the count. A country digging through rubble, where the official death toll and the list of the missing tell two very different stories. A music service trying to count which artists are even human anymore. And a shifting global power that most people haven't counted on at all. The country that quietly took the lead in inventing the medicines the whole world will take. Let's start with the ground that just moved. On Monday, a magnitude 7.4 earthquake struck western Colombia, and it was, according to Colombia's own geological service, the strongest earthquake to hit the country in the 21st century. The epicenter was in the Chocó region, and the shaking ravaged cities across the west. Cali, the country's third largest city, along with Pereira, Quibdó, and Manizales, and was felt as far away as Ecuador and Panama. As of the latest reporting, the confirmed death toll has climbed past 200, with more than 1,200 people injured. Buildings pancaked. In Cali alone, city officials reported dozens of buildings collapsed, and more than 5,000 structures damaged or destroyed. At the University Hospital of Valle, part of the upper floors collapsed, and more than 600 patients had to be evacuated and treated out in the open. Pieces of the ceiling raining down on travelers as they screamed and took cover. Now, I want to slow down on one specific chilling detail, because it's the part that turns a natural disaster into something we need to actually think about. The confirmed dead number in the low hundreds. But the number of people reported missing is far, far larger, and the two figures come from completely different places. NPR reported that civilian-run databases put the missing closer to 4,000 people. 4,000. And here's why that gap exists, and why it's so dangerous. When a disaster hits, the official death toll counts bodies that have been recovered and confirmed. But the missing list is built by families. Desperate people typing their loved ones' names into online databases, hoping someone has seen them. By Monday afternoon, one of those civilian databases already had more than 1,400 names on it, climbing by the hour. So here's my take, and it's a hard one. The official number is always the one that's cited on the news, the round, confident figure. But in the first days of a disaster, the official number is not the true number. It's the floor. It's the smallest possible version of the tragedy. The part that's already been dug out and confirmed. The real scale is hiding in that gap between confirmed dead and reported missing. And that gap is widest exactly where it's hardest to see. And Chocó, the region at the epicenter, makes this brutally concrete. Chocó is one of Colombia's poorest regions. It's nestled in dense jungle. And as NPR noted, much of it is only reachable by boat or by plane. So when the roads are cut and the region is remote and poor to begin with, the rescuers can't even get in to do the counting. Which means the official toll from those areas will lag reality by days, maybe longer. And this is the uncomfortable pattern that earthquakes always expose. They are natural events, but they kill along deeply human, deeply unequal lines. A 7.4 quake is powerful, but a lot of what determines who lives and who dies isn't the geology, it's the buildings. Whether the hospital was retrofitted, whether the poor jungle region had the same construction standards as the wealthy capital. The earth shakes everywhere equally. The buildings do not fall equally. There is one small mercy in the seismology here worth noting honestly. This quake was deep, more than 100 kilometers down, and deep quakes spread their energy out over a wider area, which often means less catastrophic destruction at any single point than a shallow quake of the same size. That depth may be the only reason we're talking about hundreds of deaths and not thousands. So as you watch this story develop over the coming days and you see that death toll climb, and it will climb, I want you to understand what you're watching. You're not watching the disaster get worse. The disaster already happened, in an instant, on Monday. What you're watching is the slow, painful process of the count catching up to a truth that was always there, buried in the rubble and in the remote jungle where the cameras and the rescuers can't easily reach. The people of Colombia are in for a hard several weeks, and they deserve our attention as the real number, not the first number, comes into focus. Let me turn now to a very different kind of counting problem, one that's about authenticity rather than survival. But that rhymes in a strange way. How do you count what's even real anymore? Spotify just tried to answer that for music. Yesterday, Spotify, the world's largest music streaming service, announced a new system called AI persona labels. Here's what it does on the facts. Starting in mid-September, Spotify will put a badge on artist profiles that are AI generated. Profiles that present themselves as a real musician but are, in fact, a synthetic identity. Crucially, music from these AI persona profiles will be excluded from Spotify's recommendations by default. The algorithmic playlists, the Discover features, unless a listener specifically opts in. Artists can label themselves starting now. But Spotify won't rely only on self-disclosure. It says it'll use human reviewers plus its own AI detection tools to flag profiles that appear to be photorealistic, AI-generated identities. Starting with the biggest ones first. And if a real artist gets mislabeled, they can appeal. And I'll be honest, my first reaction is that this is a genuinely good, listener-friendly move. And it's a response to a real, staggering problem. Just how big is the flood of AI music? The streaming service Deezer estimated that 44% of all new songs uploaded to its platform were AI-generated. About 75,000 AI tracks per day. And there's a stat floating around this whole debate that should stop you cold. Roughly 97% of people can't tell whether a track is AI-generated or not, just by listening. So Spotify giving you a way to know who's human, that's real transparency, and the listener demand for it has been loud and clear. But, there's a but. Let me put on the critical hat. Because the loophole here is big enough to drive a truck through. And it matters. Read the fine print of what this label actually targets. It flags the AI persona, the fake artist, the synthetic identity. It does not flag AI-generated music made by real, human artists. And that distinction is where the whole thing gets slippery. Because using AI is now an incredibly broad spectrum. On one end, you've got a fully faked artificial band with a fake backstory. But on the other end, you've got real, famous, human artists who have openly admitted to using AI tools in their process. The reporting names people like ABBA's Bjorn Ulvaeus and artists like Diplo and Tyga acknowledging AI in their work. Spotify's label does nothing about that. So a synthetic artist gets flagged, but a real artist who generates half their track with AI does not. The line Spotify has drawn is about the identity being fake, not about the music being artificial. And those are increasingly not the same thing. And here's the delicious irony that I can't skip, because it exposes how muddy this all is. Spotify itself is aggressively using AI. It has an AI DJ, AI-powered playlists, and a feature that generates little factoids about the song you're listening to. A feature that the artist Lorde, among others, has publicly pushed back on, partly because it sometimes just gets the facts wrong. So, the company positioning itself as the referee of what's authentically human is simultaneously stuffing its own product full of AI. That's not necessarily hypocrisy. You can label others while building your own tools, but it should make you squint at the idea that any streaming platform is a neutral guardian of authenticity here. Give Spotify real credit for a concrete step that most of its rivals haven't matched. Excluding fake artists from recommendations by default genuinely respects the listener. But understand its limits. This labels the puppet, not the strings. It cleans up the most obvious fakes while leaving the much harder, much bigger question. What happens when the line between human-made and machine-made music dissolves inside the work of real artists, completely untouched? It's a speed bump on a road that's still heading somewhere we haven't figured out how to navigate. When 97% of us can't hear the difference, does it even matter to most listeners whether there's a badge? And what does it mean for the human musicians trying to be heard over 75,000 new machine-made songs a day? All right, from who made your music to who makes your medicine. Because the third story is a quiet shift in global power that I think is genuinely underappreciated, and it hits especially close to home for a lot of you watching. Here's the headline that most people missed. China has, by several key measures, overtaken the United States in pharmaceutical innovation. Not in making cheap generic drugs, that's the old story. In inventing brand new ones. Let me give you the numbers, because they're striking and they're sourced. According to industry analysis, China's share of the world's innovative new drug candidates rose from about 8% in 2018 to roughly 30% by 2026, while the U.S. share fell from 47% down to around 36%. In 2025, more new drugs made their market debut in China than in any other country. According to Citeline's Pharma Projects database, that any nation has overtaken the United States on that specific metric. And the money followed. Total Chinese out-licensing deals, where a Chinese company sells the rights to develop its drug to a foreign giant, reached a record of around $135 billion in 2025, nearly triple the year before. In just the first couple of months of 2026, such deals hit nearly $50 billion. You can see it in the deals themselves. AstraZeneca signed a pact with China's CSPC Pharmaceuticals for obesity and metabolic drugs, with a headline value running up to $18.5 billion. AbbVie licensed a Chinese cancer drug in a deal worth up to $5.6 billion. Pfizer's own CEO, Albert Bourla, said this year, and this is a remarkable admission from the head of an American pharma giant, that for the first time in recent decades, U.S. dominance in biotech is being challenged by a competitor, and that competitor is China. He noted that 8 of the top 10 global research institutions on one major 2025 index are now Chinese. Now, this is a genuinely two-sided story, and I want to give you both sides fairly, because the knee-jerk reactions in both directions are wrong. More high-quality new drugs, invented faster and often licensed more cheaply, is potentially fantastic news from patients everywhere, including in the West. Big Western pharma companies are staring down what's called a patent cliff around 2028 to 2030. Blockbuster drugs, like Merck's cancer drug Keytruda, losing their exclusive patents, which means billions in lost revenue. They desperately need new drugs in the pipeline, and China is now the fastest, cheapest place to get them. So for Big Pharma, as one analyst bluntly put it, China's rise is simultaneously the best thing to happen to their pipeline in a decade. Patients get more medicines. Struggling drug giants get a lifeline. That's real. But here's the critical, more worrying side. And it's the one I'd weight more heavily. First, there's the hollowing out risk. One Stat News commentary argued that American biotech leaders are prioritizing short-term profits, the cheap Chinese drugs, over the long-term stability of their own industry. And, in that writer's stark phrase, allowing their own industry to be destroyed with their own blessing. When your entire pipeline increasingly depends on inventing happening somewhere else, you may be trading away the thing that made you dominant in the first place. We've seen this movie before. It's the same arc a U.S. National Security Commission explicitly warned about, comparing biotech's trajectory to what happened with semiconductors, where American leadership eroded until it became a strategic vulnerability. And that's the second worry. This isn't just about business, it's about national security and dependency. There's real concern in Washington. A National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology warned in a December report that if the U.S. loses its primacy in biopharma innovation, it risks weakening the whole engine of its biotech leadership. Lawmakers have proposed screening or restricting American investment in Chinese biotech. And there's a quieter, thornier issue underneath. The FDA has limited capacity to physically inspect clinical trial sites inside China, which raises hard questions about verifying the data behind drugs that are increasingly invented there. Add in escalating tariffs on pharmaceuticals and the geopolitical friction between the two countries, and you have a collaboration that's booming commercially, while the political ground under it gets shakier by the month. So here's my take, and it ties back to our theme of counting what really matters. For years, the West counted China as the place that made cheap copies, the factory, not the laboratory. That count is now badly out of date, and a lot of people haven't updated it. The real story isn't cheap Chinese drugs. It's that the center of gravity for inventing the medicines of the future has been quietly shifting, deal by deal, and the West's own pharma giants are the ones funding the shift, because it solves their short-term problem. Whether that's a brilliant win-win or a slow-motion strategic surrender depends entirely on a question we can't answer yet. Is this a partnership, or is it the West selling off its future one licensing deal at a time to make this decade's earnings look good? I don't think anyone honestly knows. But I know it's one of the most consequential stories almost nobody is putting on the front page. So let me tie all three together, because today's thread is about the gap between the number we're given and the reality underneath it. The official death toll is the floor, and the true scale is hiding in the gap with the missing. On Spotify, the human or AI label counts the fake identities, but misses the AI seeping into real ones. And in global medicine, the world is still counting China as a copycat, while it quietly became an inventor. In every case, the easy, official, comfortable number is not the whole truth, and the whole truth is in the part that's harder to see and slower to arrive. So here's what I'll leave you with. Get in the habit of asking, of every confident number you're handed, what's the gap? What's not being counted yet? Or on purpose? Or because it's too hard to reach? The confirmed dead, the labeled fakes, the cheap copy stereotype, those are the easy counts. The missing in the jungle, the AI inside the real song, the laboratory that used to be a factory. That's where the truth actually lives. The number is never the whole story. The gap is the story. Take care of each other, hold the people of Colombia in your thoughts, and I'll see you next time.